He was a surgeon spending his days and nights to serve humanity. But some evil humans brutally killed his wife, thinking what a practicing doctor can do against them. But just like the chemist of Breaking Bad, this doctor really broke their egos along with their necks. Welcome back to Paramount Recapped. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me. A woman heads to her car in a dimly lit underground parking lot, only to find that it won't start. Just as she's thinking, of course, the one time I don't call for a tune-up, she notices a man wearing a mask in the distance. Before she can even process how creepy this is, one man becomes three, because apparently bad guys travel in packs now. Despite her increasingly desperate attempts, the car refuses to cooperate, like it's joined the bad guys' team or something. Just as she sighs in relief when they disappear, they reappear and start smashing her car with crowbars. Well, that's one way to avoid paying for parking, she probably thinks. The men break in and drag her out, ripping at her clothes. But just then, Paul Tsai shows up, Mr. Hero, as usual, telling the men he's deaf, like he's auditioning for a horror movie. He shoots two of them right away, no questions asked. The third guy runs, but when he hits a dead end, he begs for his life. Paul, not in the mood for negotiations, shoots him too. But when he checks the body, he's stunned to see his own face staring back at him. Turns out, it was all a nightmare. Probably time to cut back on the late-night action movies, Paul. The next morning, Paul's stepdaughter Erica visits him at the office, excited to show off her new drawings. She seems a bit jittery, but Paul figures it's probably just too much coffee or teenage drama. She insists she's fine though. Then, Paul gets a call from Karen, Erica's mom, who works as a reporter at a local news station. They all meet up for dinner later, but Randy, Erica's boyfriend, pulls up outside to take her out. Karen makes her promise to be home by 11, the universal mom rule. Paul watches Randy hand Erica a cigarette, and you can almost hear him thinking, great, first the car won't start. Now my daughter's dating a guy who thinks he's James Dean. Randy and Erica end up at a shady arcade full of degenerates. Inside, Randy meets Jojo, a drug dealer, for a deal. Jojo takes an instant liking to Erica because apparently creepy drug dealers have a thing for naive girls, and takes her into another room, offering her a bag of special nuts. Meanwhile, Paul and Karen are at home planning to see a movie, but Paul's worried about Erica being out with Randy. Karen shrugs it off, saying Randy's a good student. Oh, yeah, because honor roll totally cancels out being a bad influence, Paul probably mutters under his breath. Right as they're about to head out, the phone rings. They rush to the hospital and find out Erica overdosed. The doctors try to save her, but it's too late. Karen is shattered, and Paul is filled with rage. It's like the worst possible family drama episode that just won't end. Wasting no time, Paul follows Randy one night to the arcade, where Randy confronts Jojo, blaming him for Erica's death. Randy threatens to go to the cops, but Jojo stabs him before he gets the chance. Well, so much for Randy's big plan, Paul probably thinks as he chases Jojo to the rooftop. Paul shoots Jojo before he can escape. Later, a witness gives Sergeant Reiner a description of Paul's car, setting the detectives on his trail. The next day, Paul gets an envelope at his door with a note saying, I know who you are. He probably thinks, great, just what I needed, fan mail from a stalker. Then he gets a call from the mystery person, who refuses to reveal his identity, but insists they meet. A limo picks Paul up, because who doesn't send a limo for a death threat? And he's taken to a mansion where he meets Nathan White, a tabloid publisher. Nathan explains how his daughter also died from an overdose, and now he's on a mission to wipe out the gangs. He offers Paul money, guns, and intel in exchange for some help. Paul, still in his angry dad mode, seems interested but asks for time to think it over. At Erica's funeral, Karen blames herself for everything, and Paul, in full blame the world mode, directs his anger at the gangsters and the city's drug problem. Karen wants to write an expose on the drug crisis, but her boss says no, arguing that even rich people use drugs and wouldn't want to read about it. Oh, because everyone loves a little drug problem with their morning coffee, right? Karen snaps back. Eventually, her boss caves and agrees to let her write the piece. Meanwhile, Nathan briefs Paul on the two gangs controlling the city's drug trade, one led by a guy named Ed and the other by brothers Jack and Tony. Paul, feeling like he's in an action movie, finally agrees to help. Detective Phil, who's been piecing things together, realizes that the bullets from Jojo's murder match a Vigilante case from 2 years ago. He and Sergeant Reiner pay Paul a visit, but Paul, ever the smooth talker, says he was home alone that night. The detectives leave, but you can bet they're not done with him. Paul's first assignment is to take down Ed, who's hosting a birthday party at his mansion. Paul sneaks in, posing as a waiter, and while it may seem like the setup for a comedy, it's all business. Jack and Tony show up too, and Ed suspects them of being behind JoJo's death, though the brothers deny it. Things take a violent turn when Ed kills one of his men for stealing from him. Paul gets discovered, but smooth talks his way out of danger, even helping dispose of the body before making a quick escape. Later, Paul targets Ed's associates at a restaurant, disguising a bomb as a bottle of wine, offering it as a free sample. Just as they start to suspect who he is, Paul slips out, and the bomb goes off, continuing his revenge spree one explosive situation at a time. In another mission, Paul takes out Frank by smashing his head into a cabinet and tossing him over a balcony. Reiner and Phil witness the fall, but Phil covers for Paul by lying to Reiner, saying he didn't see anything. A few days later, Nathan assigns Paul a new mission, infiltrating Ed's drug ring at a fisherman's wharf in San Pedro. Blending in with the workers, Paul discovers a massive drug operation hidden inside. He takes out a few guards and sprays the room with bullets, causing chaos before planting explosives and escaping amid the confusion. Phil, it turns out, is a double agent working for Ed. He reveals Paul's identity to Ed, who orders Phil to kill him. When Phil tries to get information from Paul at his office, Paul shoots him from under the table, killing him. Reiner, learning of Phil's death, suspects Paul and begins investigating him further. Meanwhile, Ed arranges a meeting with Jack to sort out suspicions, unaware that Paul is listening in. As tensions rise between the gangs, Paul shoots Jack in the arm, triggering a chaotic shootout. Jack is killed, and as Ed tries to flee, he is abandoned by his men. Paul finishes off Jack and wounds Ed, setting the stage for the final showdown. Paul calmly approaches Ed, who is now crawling away, knowing his fate is sealed. Paul shows Ed a picture of Erica before shooting him in the heart, ending things for good. Back at the station, Reiner's boss orders him to back off from investigating Paul, saying they've wasted too much time chasing the wrong person while the gangs tore each other apart. Meanwhile, Nathan calls Paul to congratulate him on the successful mission and arranges a meeting. Paul arrives at the location, sees a limo waiting, and gets inside. However, Nathan is nowhere to be found. Before Paul can figure out what's going on, the car locks him in. Sensing a trap, Paul shoots his way out of the back window just before the car explodes in a fiery blast. Paul, realizing he's been played, heads to Nathan's real address. He forces the doorman at gunpoint and is led to an old man who claims to be Nathan White but insists he's not the one who made the deal with Paul. The real Nathan had been away for months, leaving Paul to realize he's been part of someone else's game all along. On his way home, Paul gets pulled over by what look like cops and is arrested on suspicion of murder. But during the ride, he figures out they aren't real cops. Acting quickly, he fights back, causing the car to flip. He frees himself from the handcuffs, grabs a gun, and escapes just as sirens approach. Turns out, these fake cops are working for a third drug lord who has been manipulating everything behind the scenes to eliminate his rivals. Now, desperate to cover his tracks, the drug lord sets a new plan in motion. Meanwhile, Karen, unaware of the danger, gets a call from her source about some insider info. As she leaves her apartment, she's grabbed and thrown into a speeding van. Paul arrives home, only to find himself at gunpoint by Reiner, who's seeking revenge for Phil's death. Paul tries to explain that Phil was working for the gangsters and even tried to kill him, but Reiner doesn't believe him. At that moment, Paul gets a call. It's Karen, terrified and begging for help. The fake Nathan demands a trade for her life. Using the distraction, Paul knocks Reiner out and grabs a hidden stash of weapons and explosives. It's time for the final showdown. Paul heads to the meeting spot, an underground parking lot. The bad guys wait in a car, signaling for Paul to approach. But when they shoot up his car, they realize it's empty. Paul takes them by surprise, firing an explosive round that blows up their car, taking out most of the men. Only fake Nathan and one henchman escape, retreating to a nearby skating rink where the rest of the gang is hiding. A shootout erupts inside the rink, and Paul takes down the remaining men. He spots fake Nathan fleeing with Karen as a hostage and chases them down. In a final confrontation in the foggy rink, fake Nathan threatens to kill Karen, but Paul finishes off his last attacker. In the confusion, fake Nathan tries to escape again, but Karen fights back. Tragically, fake Nathan guns her down in cold blood, and an enraged Paul shoots him with an explosive round, tearing him to shreds. Reiner shows up just in time to hold Paul at gunpoint, but Paul, devastated, tells him to shoot before walking away into the night, just as the cops arrive.